The federal government has unveiled plans to support the growth of startups and boost their annual funding funds to a staggering sum of $5 billion by 2027. This was disclosed by Bosun Tijani, the Minister of Communications, Innovation and Digital Economy. You know, you're aware that what drives every economy is startup, the SMEs. If you look at the model from China and all the big players in the economic space, you understand that when it comes to driving the economy, small businesses, they are just the focus. And one of the challenges being faced by startups has to do with the issue of financing. For someone who wants to start a business, your first concern is, how do I get the right funding to start the business? And now the federal government is coming into that space now, you know, to provide a sum of $5 billion. And this will start from now to 2027. That sounds like a good news.
Just a good news. Like you rightly have said, SME contributes over 65% to employment generation globally. And of course, it's also contributing greater than any other to the GDP of any nation. So really, supporting SME is actually fueling the engine of growth by government. And I think one thing that we also will need to do in this area is also to see that we are really not throwing money at people, which is very important, and that's significant. People need to be trained how to run businesses. People need to be given financial education. And this is the real problem. It's not, we're not short of giving money to SMEs. But I think the real challenge has been ability to actually survive and grow through difficult times is a bigger problem for so many startups. And ability to be able to differentiate between capital and profit is a big problem. And I think why we are doing all these things, and I think government must also be ready to do is due diligence to ensure, number one, there are adequate and workable business plan with a cash flow that is well written and designed. Because this is the only way that we can train our people to be able to really be enterprising, as it were. So if we just throw money at people and say, just do something, people may end up not doing it. I remember when they were doing the trader money, the whole idea around it then was the fact that you are going to walk into the market and say cooperative, all you need to do is just give some people 5,000 who need just like 5,000, 3,000 to do something. If they can actually trade with it after a while, what you do is that you now increase it to 10,000. If they are making progress, you increase it to 5,000. And we have not seen those reports. And I am just hoping also that this won't end up that way. And I think those who are designing public policy must understand the peculiarities of our environment, that when we are giving people money, we must see that the people are serious, and we must go through the proper routing. I like what, for example, people like Toli Elumelu is doing in that space. They don't just give people money. People win it. In other words, they have to earn it.
You work for it.
So you pass through a whole lot of screening process. So all these things have to be put in place, because we're not just going to throw $5 billion down, $5 billion, huge money, just a way like that. We are going to ensure that those who are going to be beneficiary are not just the cronies or politicians, but are people who really deserve it and earn it, and they are prepared to contribute to economic growth.
But why do you think we always have a situation whereby a policy is being initiated and then the purpose for initiating that policy is not being achieved? I mean, a good example is the Anchors Borrowers Program, you know, which has been trailed with controversies. Money can be traced here and there. Investigation is still ongoing. Why do we always have that kind of situation where money is being earmarked for a particular purpose and then you discover that in the end, the purpose is not being achieved?
Well, I think they are also around those issues. About 30 years ago, when I read Richard Joseph's book, Prebenda Politics, The Rise and Fall of the Second Republic in Nigeria, And the real critical issues that Joseph raised in that book, they are still very present with us today. They have not changed. You see, like Albert Einstein says, it's only a madman who will be doing the same thing and will be expecting a different result or outcome. So if we continue to play same game, all the outcome is going to be the same, except that there's a mind shift in the way we are approaching issue. And this is why I'm actually appealing from here to Tijanu this morning that he should copy Elumelu's model. Because there are a whole lot of people who are playing in that space, and there are a whole lot of testimony that is coming from Tony's foundation. A lot of people that have been empowered who actually have shown brilliance. So this is what we should do, where we have to elevate merit over and above patronism, which is the hallmark of our politics. So this is the problem. Once we begin to determine and agree with ourselves that we want actually to grow, we will do the right things, and then the right result we will get.
Yeah, and I think that actually having a laid out procedure for how this money will be given should even be the first thing, because the money has been marked good. So what startups are they targeting? Is it people who have the idea and have not yet started because they do not have fund, or startups, people who have businesses that is less than 5 years and are still within a particular scale? So I think it is safer to give those who have already started, because you know at least there's something on the ground, compared to those who have not yet put something on the ground. Because the tendency for those who haven't yet started to come up with excuses why the business could not start is higher than those who already have a business and are looking for more expansion. Then it can encourage a kind of merger. You can merge so that it boosts the chance of the business succeeding, and also evaluate the quality of innovations that they have.
Not necessarily. Not necessarily. There are some people, they have a very clear idea of what they want to do. All they just need is fund to break through. And they're just looking for that small fund to put one or two together to break through. They are there. What for me is important and required is that we should be able to sift these people. You understand? The ideas are tested. And you see, this is where, again, we have to be thinking how the gown and the town are synergizing in this regard. Take, for example, if you are doing a project, for example, in Germany, as an engineer, it will take you to an engineering firm. That idea you are thinking in your head, they take you to where the machines are, where you can actually bring them to life. So a lot of people have actually, without money, look at Apple, for example, Steve Jobs. He just needed $200 at the time to test his idea. And he has to come to beg his friend for the $200. And the friend said, well, Steve, you know what? If you succeed, I need my $200 back. I don't need $1 extra. If you fail, give me the $200 back. But eventually, Steve succeeded. And he didn't just return the $200, he made him the vice president to him. See, this is for me important, really, to see how we can actually put measures in place to see there are a whole lot of creative and innovative people in Nigeria, in every sphere. It's just like you think, for example, sports. There are a whole lot of people who can play football than the one we are showcasing. But who give them a vent? How do we create that forum where these people are allowed to actually showcase their ability and the things that they can do is what for me is important. Take, for example, I was listening this morning and they said, oh, the Minister for Humanitarian Affairs was visiting homes in Lagos to confirm whether the people that have been registered in the 15 million people, whether they're actually in those homes. The first question to ask is, what was the level of publicity? What was the criteria for selection? I don't have an idea. So this is the real issue, because the people who knew may be the political party members. And all that the best you can see is that they are going to front their people. And this has then been the bane of our development. And I think when we are trying to do policies like this, we must be transparent and open enough so that people know how to compete. They know the rules of the game, how to win. And then if they play by the rule, and without knowing anybody, they win, number one, that will begin to build up the trust level in the system. And people begin to believe that now merit counts. You will see it will trigger hard work, it will trigger creativity, it will trigger innovation.
Yeah, I think that's key. The selection process, the requirement for selection is actually the first thing. If government or if the scheme gets it right with the selection, then the follow-up process is also important. I'll give an example of, there's a scholarship scheme that was employed by one of the states. So for the scholarship scheme, after your study, there's an internship program that gives you the chance to practicalize what you've been taught. And when you're able to scale through that internship program, you are given gigs. They just give you connection to having gigs to that so that you're further established in that. And over a year of it, there is still that constant follow-up process that you don't even expect it. It just comes like that. So there's a check to continually ensure that those who have benefited from that actually put into work what they've taught. Else, you'll be disqualified from further opportunities like that. So I think such would work, and it will go a long way in further growing Nigeria's digital economy.
All right, let's go to the next story. It's still loan related, but this time around, it's agri sector. The federal government and International Finance for Agri Livelihood Improvement Family Enterprise in the Niger Delta project has partnered with a microfinance bank to provide farmers in Ondo State with loans at single-digit interest rates. You know, yesterday we talked about the need to diversify the economy. You know, this is coming as an initiative to see how they can improve the plight of farmers. You know, like we rightly said, talked about SME, small business owners. When it comes to accessing loans, that's been the challenge. Farmers are ready to work. You know, even though most of the farmers you have in Nigeria or by extension Africa, they are more small players who just want to provide for themselves and their families, not the commercial kind of agriculture.
Subsistence
or
farming.
You understand? And so, but the truth still remains that they need access to finance. And now the federal government is coming up with this initiative with a private entity to also partner with a microfinance bank. What I find interesting is the loan at single-digit interest rates.
Yeah, I think that's very fundamental. If you remember, I think it was when the CBN governor was being cleared at the Senate, that Adams Oshiomhole raised some very critical issues in that screening session. And he did say that, look, it would be criminal for you to give a loan to somebody at 20%, and then you'll be expecting the person to do magic. And they had a very funny comparison that day between that. Even if you're a drug bureau in Nigeria, you will not be able to compete with those from Mexico. But that is the real reality that you see, that sometimes we give facility to people, and then, of course, we are expecting them to farm. But again, because it's not still far away from what we have just discussed, we also be very sure that this funding is not just going into subsistence farming, like Blessing has said, because that's what we do here. We're just cropping to eat. If you put money in cropping to eat, it cannot be productive. And this is where, of course, the Federal Ministry of Agriculture really would need to do a whole lot of serious thinking. Take, for example, you can begin to encourage cooperative farming, where you can set target for people. You're asking them, okay, this cooperative, the kind of cassava we are wanting from you that will be used for starch is X ton. Just grow it. After 6 months harvested, it will be taken from you. It's not to be eaten. It's to be sold. It's for commercial purpose. Then, of course, we are able to recoup back this loan. But if the farming are not commercial in nature, you just sink in the money there. If the farmer, the money is too much for him, he can marry additional wife. So this is the real issue, and this is what we need really to contend with. And I really keep saying that we must have to train our people so that they can actually, because if it's a loan, which means it has to be paid back. Now, the process of payback must come with a cash flow that tells us that in 6 months, in 1 year, in 3 years, this is how I'm going to pay back this loan. Bearing any, what they call in contract, force majeure. So, if the farmers have this understanding, then we can make some progress. And this is, again, very important. Loans are supposed to be commercial. And therefore, activities that they are going to be used for have to be commercial. And it's not just enough to give them loan to do commercial business. Then government must also invest somehow or encourage investment in that value chain of that particular product we want to sell. We don't deliberately need to sell anything. Let it just be that, of course, what we're going to be known for example, is corn. I used that analogy yesterday, just corn. And we're saying grow corn so that we can ship corn to the whole of East Africa and ship corn to Europe. And then we still have to sell for our feeds here. So once we have those investments in this value chain, you find that the farmer will be able to actually produce, and they will have off-takers who take these things from them, and then they can actually make value for themselves and then able to repay back the facility.
Yeah, that makes it easy for them to be able to guarantee that, oh, the loans will be repaid, because the farmers too are used to loans, even at substance level, though not from government, but they have their cooperatives, they have thrift unions where they collect little loans during farming seasons, and they're able to pay back. But I think it is because that over time, farmers get grants. So they're used to grants and also treat loans as grants, particularly when the payment plans are not clearly spelled out. So yes, excuse can come, they can default, and nothing happened. Remember the Anchor Borrower scheme and how much a success it had. Not very much. Very much farmers were able to do the repay back thing. So the value chain ensures that as you're producing, you have people who are taking this off you, and it also serves as a motivation for the farmers to go more into it intentionally.
Please, Ondo farmer, it's not a gift, it's a loan. Use it wisely.
And I hope we won't have a situation whereby this money will get to the hands of what you call political farmers.
Oh, yes.
You know, I didn't know that until recently. One agric officer, I had a meeting with him, and he was giving me the impression that you have political farmers. People claim to have farms, so they're into farming.
Oh, yes.
They will come up with pictures, certain evidences to show that they're into farming. In fact, they go as far as taking pictures from people's farm, another person's farm, claiming they have farms and they are ready for farming, and in order to be able to obtain loan, and you see them getting loans, and those loans are diverted. I hope this will not play out this time around. And then most importantly is the access to this financing. I hope it's not going to be like the regular loan where there are bottlenecks, you have to provide this, to provide that, and before you do that, almost 6 months is over, and then you can't even do the business that you actually ought to do. Let's hope for the best, and as we keep hoping for the best. All right, let's go to ICPC now. There's a serious case here that has to do with corruption, the alleged fund diversion involving 4 senior officials from the Department of Farm Input Support Services within the Federal Ministry of Agric and Rural Development. You know, yesterday we talked about Nigeria at 63. We talked about the issue of corruption, anti-corruption. But there was could it be the case of corruption is fighting back, as alluded to by our former president?
Yeah, of course, we continue to fight corruption as long as people low in virtues and value. I think that's a real challenge that faces us as a people. I was sharing with somebody yesterday And I will not stop talking at this because most of the real reason why we see business failure in environment is corruption. The real reason why we see government is actually not able to do meaningful things is corruption, and this is very huge. ICPC has been there over time, and they've been trying to do their own bit to see how to curtail the excesses of greedy and very corrupt officials. They will not stop. They will continue to do their little role. But the job is really very overwhelming for the ICPC because the level of involvement is massive. And this is the issue really we must speak to daily. There are people who are going to work must understand that it's just more than an individual. There are a lot of people who are suffering as a result of this bad behavior. The challenges that we are facing today, the whole gamut of insecurity, all of them are tied to this malfeasance that is taking place in government quarters. And I just do hope that public officers and maybe labor should start to go on strike as we see public officers stealing money, not just overpay.
Or to protest misconduct.
Yes.
Not just for
that would be interesting. that would be interesting to see. But the thing is about investigations like this, the hope that it comes to a conclusion and erring officials are penalized, not just for them to be under the radar for a while, and after that time nobody gets to hear or gets to know what happens to them, and then it doesn't serve as a deterrent to others.
You know what amazes me is the fact that this set of people, even though it's still being alleged, is still in the realm of allegation, but they are high-ranking senior officials, you know, including the director, deputy director, head of accounting unit.
Yeah, but you have to be at that level to be able to steal in government. That is the very truth. So if you are not a director, you won't have access. Because stealing in public office is actually opportunity. Opportunity, meeting with pressure. And then, of course, there's a whole lot ground and room for rationalization. You see, the bigger problem we actually have is the legal framework that governs us as a people. I was listening to Patrick Lumumba yesterday on the platform, and I was saying, look, you see, many lawyers always graduate citing cases in London and here. All that you need this thing to do is just to tarry and delay your cases for several years. And I think this is really the issues that ICPC and EFCC faces most of the time in terms of prosecuting. And this is why you can actually not see penalties in good time, because the cases drag for too long. And lawyers take these things, they can stay on one case, and all they are asking for is ex parte order, and the court is granting ex parte motion over nothing. Flimsy excuses at court. Court can't sit. All these things are delayed tactics. And the more you delay this issue, the more they lose their relevance. And some of them, because before you get to a director in public office, except that you are privileged, you have to be on your way out. You know what that means? So the case will still be in court while you are retired. And this is the real challenge that these people faces. That's why you don't see justice from time to time come speedily, because our court processes are too ambiguous. You cannot really determine when you start a case and when you're going to end it. And I think that's where we need a whole lot of reform in the judiciary, because really when there are consequences for action or bad behavior, a lot of people will be deterred from going that same route.
I like that. Let's move on. This time around, SERAP is in the news. That's Socio-Economic Rights and Accountability Project. Now, they filed a suit against state governors in Nigeria seeking a court order compelling each governor to disclose detailed information about the 72 billion palliative funds provided by the federal government to the poor. You know, due to the removal of subsidy, palliatives were provided to the 36 state governments. And now SERAP to show accountability is compelling. In fact, state has gone to court to compel all state governors to disclose, details of how this money has been spent and what they've done with this money so far. Do you agree with Sarah Delza?
Well, I think we cannot agree less. Accountability is very critical. I don't think state government or state governors need a rap to take them to court to be able to say to people, this is what we have done with the 2 billion we have received so far from the 5 billion promised. And of course, you remember that in the presidential speech at Independence Day before yesterday, the presidency alluded to it as part of the measure that government is taking to see how to really ameliorate this problem. And for him, in his conception, it's actually an investment kind of fund for states. Really, it's not palliative, so to speak, something that people are going to cushion their immediate challenge or need. But I think we must get to that level where we have to put ourselves to check, that we have to go to court to be able to prove these things. And I think this is why where a whole lot of work needs to be done on our public officers. When we take office as government officers, we must know that its accountability requires that we tell people how public funds are being spent. And I didn't think even Serap needed to go to court for that. There is a Freedom of Information Act that has been signed into law that requires Serap to actually go to state governors and ask them to give them this thing without necessarily making it a lawsuit. But I think, again, publicity is also one of the things that Serap is clouting every time. When you have windows that are open to you to be able to get to government and ask government and said, the Freedom of Information said, give me these records, and they give it to you. You don't need to go to court or come to newspaper, except that Serap is also seeking publicity, maybe for whatever reason.
Yeah, I think it's also part of the hostile nature we've developed towards each other while doing the job. When organizations like SERAP are demanding accountability, we also know that sometimes there will be some hostility from the organization or from the arm of government. SERAP is demanding that accountability. So it has what is brought about this, and the publicity too is part of it. How would you know SERAP is doing their job if they don't go to court?
Yeah, but they don't need to go to court. You see, this is where the real issues are. We will know where. You can't sue 36 state governors. Where there is Freedom of Information Act that says every Nigerian can have access to government and public spending. So if you have approached Lagos State and they refused, and you go to court, it will make sense than these pages of newspaper trials.
Okay, I asked that sarcastically because how would you know they are doing their job if they don't go to court and it's not in the news? So sometimes it seems like you need to make a bit of noise for people to know that you are really doing your job. But it also means that maybe SERAP should begin to check the approach with which it handles some of these matters. Yes, thanks to SERAP on behalf of Nigerian citizens for, in their own way, holding elective officers or public officers accountable. But I think we need to rejig the approach. It's not all the time that the issues should end up in litigation, except when it is necessary that it becomes a matter of litigation.
All right, let's go to this special message from IMF. It's a warning, and that countries could witness an increase in debt levels equivalent to 45 to 50% of their GDP by 2050. As they strive to meet emission reduction targets, and suggested that countries should work to elevate this debt through carbon pricing measures. According to IMF, every reliance on spending measures to achieve climate goals could lead to a significant increase in public. IMF is trying to warn countries to ensure that they watch their public debt, a situation whereby carbon emission, you have to borrow, spending money on that in order to meet the target, the goal. So there's this warning always coming from IMF. Dawza, what do you see to it?
Well, I think warning against debt is always very important because there's a connect between debt and crisis. And I think Ray Dalio in his work had established this connect studying history for over 500 years, was able to establish that when you have a very high debt burden, it creates crisis, and you have internal quarrels, internal fighting, sometimes that can blow into international wars. And this is why nations have gone to war, and we can see this. And really, to speak, every nation has borrowed to their truth. There's no one single nation, including the Americas. Every nation on earth, they have overborrowed. And that's where we are at the moment, that the fight and struggle for survival is very severe. And you read in the news just now, see the measures UKs are trying to adopt to see how to reduce this burden. And one way to do that is to cut down their public spending by reducing their workforce. And I think nations need to all imbibe this. And I think our own government too must be thinking about scaling down. Because yesterday I took my calculator and I was looking at giving 25,000 to 15 million people. And that is equal to about 375 billion monthly. And in 3 months, it's about 1.12 trillion. In 1 month, that's a whole lot of money. And I don't see that coming from our revenue. So which, of course, definitely government must go to take some further loans. And then, of course, you are increasing at the same time workers' salary, which is going to be 35%. And that's what the government, president was saying, oh, we don't want this thing to drive inflation, but you can't hide it. Now, everybody already know that you have increased prices and you are giving people money. It's going to reflect in the price of good. And I can tell you, by the time the figures of inflation comes out for the month of October, you will be very sure that these have already been built in. And so government must begin to think how to cut their coats according to their cloth. It's important, not just individuals, even government. We must become leaner and spend less on overhead. Otherwise, the bubble will burst.
Yeah, I don't really subscribe to the plan of scaling down, because in my thinking, that would further increase the poverty issue that we talk about. Because if government were to scale down and some persons were to be put out of work, how would they cope? Now, government is putting up some form of cushioning measure to ensure that people do not suffer much the effect of subsidy removal. So I do not subscribe to that. But talking about the increase in workers' salary, automatically or directly increasing inflation, that is very true. You know, when the salaries of those in the academia was increased, I think that's of the federal, those who were in tertiary institutions. I talked about, and I told Femi that the next time he sends someone to the market, he will get the report that they too have also increased prices, because everybody wants to get a piece of the cake. Those who are in having their private business, those in the market, they cannot differentiate who was received from that or who wasn't received from that. So everybody wants to get from that cake, and automatically we're back to the same place.
You see, for me, we always talk about this employment. And it's because we have created the impression that the only way to gain employment is that somebody is working in a government office, or maybe in a private office like this where you wear tie and suit. That's not always employment. People can always be repurposed. That even if you are going to move people out, it's not just throwing them into the street. Some of these people can be trained and retrained. You see, what that means for government is effectiveness and efficiency. I did an analogy some days ago on this set. When NDDC was created, for example, the capital expenditure to recurrent expenditure was 80-20. 80% of their budget, first 2 years, was on capital projects. And they were spending just 20 to pay salaries and run the offices. 4 years after, it reverts. We're now spending 80% to do recurrent, and only 20% is going to capital projects. Now, when you see, and if you have to assess NDDC today, will you say they are effective? No. This is the question, and this is where we must be very careful while we're making a case for over-bloated civil service. Over-bloated. Government has no business in business, and it's not government that must generate employment. All that government should do is to create the enabling environment for small businesses to thrive. Create enabling environment for blue chip companies to do well. Multinational companies to come and establish and then give work to people. And I think that's what government should do. And then the little we have, we can spend it on health, we can spend it on education and social services that benefit the majority and every other person. Now, but this is where we are shooting ourselves in the leg. We are complaining there's no good schools. We are complaining there's no good roads. We are complaining there are no hospitals. And yet we are saying you have to maintain your over-bloated civil service that is almost costing you everything. We're talking about debt here. Nigeria is servicing debt with over 90% of its revenue. As of today, that's not sustainable. Now, if there's anything that we can do to reduce this level, I think government has to be thinking about it. Because eventually, you will not be able to pay. And when you are not able to pay, you will create social tension. And that same tension will lead every one of us to where we may not want to go.
This is Early Exchange, shaping policy, advancing development.